Well, hello. Hello, Big Kev. We'll give a few minutes for some others to join us. Welcome, James. If you don't mind, I'm going to take a sip of my coffee. Pastor Mike. Jerry. Hello, Preacher. Brother Strata. We'll give just about another minute or so, and then we'll get started with tonight's study. If you're there and you'd like for others to join you, feel free to share it and invite some other people to join in with us on tonight's study. All right, let's get going with tonight's study. Again, welcome to tonight's Bible study. We'll be studying tonight primarily Genesis 4. And I think tonight we'll probably end up with our study of Genesis by reviewing where we've been in it, and we'll decide next week what subjects we take a look at. But for the most part, this has been a basic fundamental study where we basically read through the scripture and explain some of the nuances of the scriptures in terms of what they mean. And hopefully in doing that, you'll have a better idea of how to interpret the book of Genesis. And for your own teaching and preaching purposes and ministry purposes, you'll be able to use it a little more effectively. So hopefully you'll pick up a few tips on actually how we like to look at the book of Genesis. Now, just as a quick review, and then at the end, I think we're going to review chapter 1 through 4 and share some nuances about them. But as a quick review, we note that chapter 1 of Genesis teaches that God created the heavens and the earth. And that very first scripture, Genesis 1:1, is a summation of what God did. And after that summation, he goes through the rest of chapter 1, unfolding how that happened. And when we get down to the creation of man, we discover the details of that creation of man over in chapter 2. Okay, so after he created man and female, we go to chapter 2 and read the details of how man was created. And we note there that man was created from the dust, and then he took the rib, the very DNA from Adam, and created woman. And then on the seventh day, he rested. And then we come around to chapter 3, and we discover that that the serpent was a very subtle beast of creation, and Eve was, and he talked with Eve about eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and Eve took fruit and she ate, and she gave to her husband and he ate, and after that they were cursed, and the entire shape of the world, the earth as we know it, as it was then, as it came to be now, changed. It became more challenging, more difficult to live in the earth because thorns and thistles started to grow. We also note that after they consumed from the tree of knowledge, that the Bible says their eyes were open and realized they were naked. So they started to move from their purpose in pleasure to just pleasure. And so in doing that, they created aprons of leaves, and they put those leaves around it to cover themselves. But then after God pronounced the curse upon them, the thorns and thistles started to grow. So God gave them animal skin garments. And so that skin was not only just a cover, but to also protect them. So now and after that, they were put out of the garden, and God told them they would have to work harder for their way of life. They would be much harder, and that's really how it is when we fall out of the presence, near presence of God, we have to work a bit harder for what we get when we fall out of favor with God. And that's just the way it is, and that continues today. So that brings it around to chapter 4. So let's start to read chapter 4, and then we'll come back and share some more points with you. So let's start to read chapter 4. And again, I have one of my computers that I'm reading from the screen. So if you see me looking away, I'm looking at the screen. On the other side, I have some notes to help me stay on track. So here we go. Bit of fundamental study. That's what we're doing. Okay. And we'll point out some things to you as we do it. So let's Bible read. Ready? Genesis 4. And I'm going to use the NIV version as we read this. It said, so this is after what we call the fall of man, what Christians call the fall of man. And they're outside the garden. Okay. They don't have access anymore to the tree of life. Okay. The tree of knowledge of good and evil. They're outside the Garden of Eden. And by the way, that was a pretty large space that they had before. So they're outside there. So here it is. Genesis 4. Adam made love to his wife, Eve. And that's what he should be doing. That's his wife, Eve. And she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. That's what happens to him. And she said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. So a few things to note here. We find that Adam and Eve are still enjoying having sex. This is still their call to be fruitful and multiply, and we assume that it's still also pleasurable for them as they participate. And if you participate in sex, well, guess what? Yep, you get pregnant, and that's what happened. This is all normal. God created this to be this way. When God created the heaven and earth, he created the processes within the earth, and all these processes, he said, they were good in the first chapter of Genesis. And then when it came around to man and woman, he said it's very good. So we have them now. So she said she brought forth a man child, and this is where we get the idea and the concept, even today, that when a person has a man child first, it's extremely special. There's just something about having that man child first. And so this is where this concept comes from, and it perpetuates today. Okay. And after we had the second child was a man as well. Now, so recall they're outside the garden, which means they have to work now. They have to till the ground. They have to tend to the livestock. Okay. They have to do this manual labor to take care of themselves and to take care of what God gave them. So here's what's happening now. Now, Abel, his responsibility was to keep the flock. Okay? It had been sheep, goats, whatever, but he kept the flock. Cain was to work the soil. So he brought the wheat, the grain, the corn, or whatever the things that grow from the ground. He's a farmer. So we have one's a shepherd and one's a farmer. In the course of time, Cain brought forth fruit of the soil as an offering to the Lord. That's nothing wrong with that. Somewhere now we get the idea that they had a sense that in order to maintain a relationship with God and to serve as a symbol to God that they wanted to interact with him, they would bring an offering. Now, at this point in time, it's not altogether clear where the concept comes from, but nevertheless, they have a concept that given to God is something they should do as people. And so that's what they're doing. They're executing something that's inside of them that to bring an offering to God. So they're bringing that offering. So he brought the offering. Okay. And Abel also brought an offering, the fat portion, from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked on with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain's offering, he did not look on with favor. So Cain became very angry and his face was downcast. Now notice something here. Watch how it reads. Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering. Brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering. He's bringing an offering, and it says some of the fruits of the offering. Abel also brought an offering, fat portions of some of the firstborn of his flock. And Abel's was accepted in God's and Cain's was not. From this scripture, we surmise and we believe that Abel was bringing what is now known as a first fruit offering, meaning that as soon as he had a flock, there's no guarantee what the rest of his flock would look like, but he wanted to dedicate that first portion of his first portion to God. Okay, you get that? So before his entire flock is in, before he knows how many he's going to have in the herd, before he even takes account, he has a portion in, and it says to bring the fat portion, which means he wants to bring the best portion, and he wants to offer that to God, not knowing whether he'll have any more for himself or to replace it. That is the concept of first fruit. On the other hand, Cain, we surmise and gather, took his crop, and now that he's counted his crop, he knows how much he has, he knows how much he can produce, he knows how much he'll have left over, he'll know he's planned for tomorrow and everything. He said, well, since I have enough now, I'm going to give a portion to God. You get it? And so the sense here is that Abel was more willing to simply give to God with no expectation of what the rest would look like. Cain, on the other hand, wanted to know how much he might have left later. Okay? And this is where we get the concept of first fruit. And first fruit for many are still practiced to this day, where they take the first part of their offering and they offer that as an offering. So, but we do know this, that God was not pleased. So there was a difference in the intent and the heart of the offering, and that is the key principle you want to make sure you hold on to. That the intent of the offering should show the heart, that shows the heart for God. Okay? All right, so here it is. So there's a difference. And so Cain became angry. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, in other words, if you offer your offering the proper type, then it will be accepted also. By the way, tonight's lesson on chapter 4 isn't necessarily trying to teach you how to do offerings. This is what chapter has to be talking about at this time. But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at the door, and this crouching at the door has a sign like a gargoyle, like something standing over you, just can't wait to consume you. Okay? So it's like, I'm just waiting on you to make a mistake, and I'm going to get you. That's the sense of this crouching, the word here. And it desires to have you, but it must not rule over you. And therein is the key. He became angry. Okay. He didn't like very well what happened to him. We got that. But the key is not to let that anger take you to some state beyond where you are. You got angry, get over it now. Get over it early. Don't let it linger, because if it does, you might find yourself doing some other things. Okay? So God said to him, if you do what is right, okay, yours will be accepted too. That's the lesson for us to learn. If we do what's right, ours will be accepted too. Otherwise, there might be other penalties to pay. So now Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go to the field. Okay? So I'm sure Abel didn't think anything different than that. Walk out to the field. Imagine, we don't know how many years they walked around these fields. While they're in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. So here it is, Cain, the first murder recorded in the annals of man. Cain killed Abel, and he killed him because he was angry with him. And he was angry with him because obviously he had developed jealousy of it. And he was jealous because Abel's offering was accepted by God and his wasn't. This doesn't mean that he would not have another opportunity to bring another offering to God or to do something to be accepted by God. But for whatever reason, this one really bothered him. Okay. And that can happen for us. Sometimes we can allow one thing to bother us so much that we get off track. And in this case, the consequences were absolutely devastating. Cain killed his brother Abel. Story, if you follow the Bible, you know. And watch this. It said, then the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? And he said, I don't know, he replied. So here he's lying. Okay. Am I my brother's keeper? A little bit of wit there. The Lord said, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out from the ground. Now you are under a curse and are driven from the ground, which opens its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, he said, here's what's going to happen now. Now that you've done wrong, you're going to suffer a similar consequence that your father did when he did wrong. You're going to have to work harder. So we now see what happens, that if we don't control our actions, or we don't control our sins, we don't control these types of things, it really comes back, and we now have to work harder for the things that we're going to receive in the earth. And that's just true today. So he said, you're now in a curse. Verse 12, when you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. That is a fair amount of punishment. But in this case, he brought it upon himself. Okay. He had an opportunity to stop after God's first conversation with him. And we don't know how long between these events that this happened. Okay. But certainly there was enough time for him to change his mind. Cain said to the Lord, verse 13, my punishment is more than I can bear. It's more than I can bear. Today you're driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. And that is punishment. To be hidden from the presence of God is punishment. Now, nowhere did God say he would be absolutely hidden from his punishment, but that's what Cain assumed here. Because now he's driving him further from the source of his blessings. Okay? We get the sense here that Adam and Eve, they had done their restart, and they had adjusted to their restart. And that restart has started to bear benefits. The same thing can happen in your life. You can get adjusted to your restart. You will make mistakes. But once you adjust to your restart, be careful not to add things back to it that's going to cause problems. And that's what we see happening here. And what you really see is the perpetuation of sin throughout the nature of man. It's now become part of that nature, and Cain took on that very nature. And verse 16 so Cain was driven out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. When we talk about out from God's presence, during this time there was this area, Eden, and around Eden where God, based on Scripture and what we can glean from the Scripture, would visit. And that had become a part of their lives. And now Cain was not going to experience that intimate relationship with God because of his own actions. And then verse 17 reads on to say, Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. And Cain was a builder of the cities. And it goes on to describe the rest of this, which we won't necessarily read in detail. The rest of the chapter goes on to explain how men start to grow and the earth started to be replenished with more and more people. And people occasionally ask the question, where did they get their wives from? Well, obviously, it came from the same line of Adam and Eve. And so Adam and Eve must have had daughters in order for that to happen. So now that's beginning to perpetuate and replenish the earth, which was the charge given to Adam and Eve. So what we're learning now from chapter 4 is that the responsibility put before Adam and Eve is harder to fulfill, but they are fulfilling it. But in fulfilling it, we notice that the people that are growing out of them and being born from them are becoming weaker and weaker and weaker. But then it goes on to verse 25, and we're going to find just how much mercy God has upon man. So Abel's been killed, Cain's been driven away, but God still loves his creation, still loves Adam and Eve so much that notice verse 25, and Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. Seth also had a son, and his name was Enos. And at the time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. So what we see now is that after the birth of Seth, there was a greater awareness of people to call upon the name of the Lord, and they executed that. And that is important for us to realize today, that as we grow, there becomes a greater need for us to call upon the name of the Lord. Adam and Eve were God's special creation in the earth. From that special creation came Adam and Eve's sons after they had fallen from God's grace. Abel worked at maintaining a relationship with God through what he offered to God. Cain worked on making an offering, but appears with less concern about the relationship in what he offered to God. After that, Cain became jealous and killed Abel. And perhaps in his mind, he thought this might make him closer to God, but it pushed him further away from the presence of God. But because of God's love for his creation called man, he allowed Adam and Eve to bring forth Seth. And from there, the rest of the earth started to grow and grow. And we have what we have today. So chapter 2 introduces some very important principles again about the nature of man becoming weaker towards his relationship with God. So now with that, again, that's chapter 4. I want to go back now and summarize chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4. Because this might be our last time of studying Genesis for a while. So let's go back and recap some things. You have a paper and pad. I'll allow you to write these down. From chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4 of Genesis, we learn some of the very primary principles that many of us still live by today, and many principles of which people make decisions about how they will interact with God, and about how they will establish a relationship with God, and how they also will establish a relationship with each other. And I want to simply point those out to you so that you have them and you are aware of them. So here we go. Principle number 1, which most people are aware of, is that we believe that God created the heavens and the earth, and that happened from nothing. He was somewhere out there in the midst of nowhere, and he spoke this into being. He spoke out of his spirit, and physical came into being. And that's how God operates. He speaks from his spirit, and physical comes into being. And Genesis 1 and 1 teaches us that, and the rest of the chapters will follow. Now, we know also that one of God's greatest creations and premier creation was man and female. And chapter 127 tells us that he created male and female, created he them. So he created both male and female by creating man first, toiled in the ground, and made man. After man, he pulled the DNA, the rib from Adam, and created woman. And he made them complementary. They don't have the same parts. They're complementary parts. And so he made them that way. In making them, he allowed them to have purpose with pleasure. Okay? Now, there is a difference in the nature of man and woman based upon the story on Genesis. Okay, and again, my sharing with you is only based upon scripture. When woman was created, God brought woman to man. Man saw. Notice I said saw. Man saw woman, and he was excited about woman. And to this day, most men are excited when they see women too. And this is where we have the concept of men being sight activated. You hear people say, "Well, men are sight activated." And most men are sight activated. You'll see this in Genesis 2:22 through 23. So this is a concept that men are sight activated. That's why when men see women, they get excited about women. People will comment that women are emotionally based. Well, we get a sense for that from Genesis 3, 1 through 6, where a woman had listened to the serpent and she got emotionally involved with the serpent. And from there, she shared the fruit with Adam. So this is where people get the concept of women being emotionally based, and they'll say something like men are from Mars and women are from Venus, or vice versa. I don't know that proverb that well, but we do know that that Adam got excited when he saw the woman, and we know that Eve was emotionally stimulated by the serpent. We also see how the devil used the serpents, the craftiness of the serpent, to his advantage, and he's doing that today. The devil, or the enemy, or Satan, or whatever term you're using tonight. Some call him the enemy, some call him devil, some call him Satan, some just call him evil. Some call him Lucifer, whatever name you're calling tonight. We find that he will also use our craftiness as a disadvantage and to pull us away from the Lord. So sometimes it's our own craftiness that gets us in a bit of trouble. And so he used the craftiness, and that appealed to Eve, and Eve appealed to Adam. There's also this concept about the fountain of youth. Well, we don't know whether there's a fountain of youth, but there certainly was a tree of life. And it is very likely that Adam, not fallen from grace, he would have had the opportunity to eat from that tree of life, which would replenish him. And the Lord said that's why he put him outside the garden, because otherwise he would take of it and live forever. We also get a sense that the clock of man toward death started after the fall of man. And that's pretty clear if you read Genesis 2 and 17. Okay. One other interesting thing, people like to talk about being vegetarians or being meat eaters and things of that nature. Well, if you read Genesis 1 and 29, you'll note that they were vegetarians. He said he gave you things that came from the sea to eat. We also note that there was no shame in their game of how they were living prior to the fall. And so it is for us that we need to find a way to get that back, get our innocence back. We may not be able to get it back in terms of our physical things, but spiritually we want to work toward gaining that back. We also discovered that Adam and Eve lost sight of pleasure with purpose. Okay, they took purpose out of pleasure, and because of that, we discovered that they put the leaves on, and God put the skin on. So these are some nuances that you've learned, hopefully, in your study with us through the book of Genesis. So what are we telling you tonight? When we look at the first 4 chapters of Genesis, we get a real good picture of what God's expectations were for man in the earth. We also get a good idea of what God expects for us after we have fallen from grace, that he will allow a process to bring us back into grace. But oftentimes we don't want to follow the process for getting back into grace, as did Cain. He refused to follow the process of being in God's grace. And since he could not attack God, he attacked Abel. And that same concept happens today. Many times people attack people when they're angry, really angry about something God permits or something God allows. So you want to be aware that your actions before God are very important to how close God will pull you in to his presence and allow you to reap the greatest benefits from being in his presence. You can reestablish that connection and that intimacy through the Spirit of God that he's given you by simply making yourself that offering that he wants to see in the earth. God bless you. This concludes our study of Genesis 4. Dr. Anthony Revis. We studied Genesis 1, 2, 3, and 4. And next week, perhaps we'll pick up with another book of the Bible, some of the topic. If you have topics you'd like to hear about, why don't you just send us a note, and perhaps we'll be able to get those on for you. Again, enjoy your evening. Dr. Anthony Revis, Midland, Michigan, USA. God bless.